Hello, friends. Do you still have little ones in your home with you? Or do you have friends who are still in the season of having little busy hands and feet all over their house? Well, either way, I am so glad you are here because we are going to be talking about something that is so beautiful and near and dear to my heart, which is how to learn gently with children during the early years. So often, learning can become this forceful thing or something that we feel a burden on ourselves as the moms to have to begin teaching. It's time for me to start teaching them things. Whereas I think by the end of this conversation today, you'll be very, very encouraged in seeing that you have been teaching them for so long already and that you are equipped and you are capable. And at the times that you're not, God is so good to be our strength when we are weak. So let me introduce you to our guest for today. She's so sweet. You're going to love her. Her name is Katie Klein, and she is a mama of 3 kids. They are 2, 4, and 6. And I asked her here for this conversation because she has shared on her Instagram feed so beautifully how she tenderly teaches her children and walks alongside them with intentional learning, but in such a beautiful way. And I'm really excited for you to get to hear from her today, to hear how she does that and why and what it looks like in her home. I know it's going to inspire you. So you're going to want to follow her. You can find her on her blog, which is littlehouseinthenorthwoods.com, or you can find her on her Instagram, which is at littlehouse_northwoods. And you will just enjoy following her along her life as she does early education with her young children. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad you can join us today.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Seek Holy Living podcast with Krista Svoboda. I am a wife to my wonderful husband, mom to my 5 precious children, and a friend to some amazing moms that I can't wait to introduce to you. Mothering is not a journey meant to be traveled alone. Join me every Monday for a new podcast where you will find hope, joy, and purpose.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I feel really honored to be asked to talk about this topic with you today.
And it's such an important one, the idea of a gentle way of learning with young children. I have loved following you on Instagram and seeing the way that you just tenderly teach your children and naturally bring in topics of learning with them that I think so often we force things with young children. And you do it in such a beautiful, beautiful way.
Thank you. That's so kind of you to say.
So I'm excited to talk about this. So let's just start off. For anyone who does not follow you and has not seen your home, can you kind of give us a glimpse of what a more gentle way of learning with preschoolers or young children, what it looks like in your house?
Yeah, so I have 3 kids. They're 2, 4, and 6, and we have done preschool in our first year of preschool. I started really early, and it looked really different than it does now. And this year for my middle, this will be her first year in preschool. And we're focusing on 4, I like to call it my 4 pillars of preschool. So that would be, we are focusing on lots of time outside, on reading lots of living books together, of working on habits of like attention, obedience, and truthfulness. And then we were working on like habits of learning chores and skills around that, like just living skills around the house. And then we are kind of delaying that formal education, which is what you see in oftentimes a more traditional preschool. So we are doing a lot of play-based academics and a lot of academics that I would like to say is like, by the way. And so we're just pursuing a really gentle, playful preschool with her.
That's so fun. Okay. So with that, let's go back to a couple of things you said that I know what you're talking about because I have done things very similarly, but I think some other moms might be like, wait, what? Okay. Living books. What is a living book?
So I've learned a lot about this as I've, pursued just researching more about education and really finding Charlotte Mason, who is a huge proponent for living books. Living books would be I like to say like a book with a heartbeat, books that really impact you, books that you can walk away and you're like, wow, that really was transformative. It was, had a great storyline, good character development, that doesn't talk down to a child, but treats the child as like a whole person that has like intellect and is able to engage with a worthy, beautiful idea. So it's not this like Disney twaddly, she calls it twaddle, where it's so much text, so much, like I think as a parent, you can really tell the difference. Like if you go and check out, 10 books from the library, I think when you read them out loud, you're going to know which ones are twaddle and which ones are these more rich living books. I first encountered the idea primarily through Charlotte Mason and then through Ambleside Online, which is the curriculum that we use for my oldest. They have a great book list for kids who are under the age of 6. And we started there and read a lot of those books. And I feel like that really helped me have like those glasses on for being able to see a living book. And now it feels kind of second nature, but that's the living books that we read in our home.
That's great. And you know what? I'll link some different resources. I think about Ambleside Online is a wonderful resource for good, rich literature. That when reading books to little children, I think sometimes there's a assumption that all books are created equal. We read 6 books today, but I believe, as I hear in you too, I would rather read one rich book than read 6 books that are shallow. Or don't have meaning. And not that there isn't space for fun, light books, because we certainly read light, enjoyable books. And I think that the living books can be enjoyable too, though, and are enjoyable. I would even argue more enjoyable, yeah. Once you get into them and truly taste it. And I think I grew up homeschooling, and we did a lot of living books. We used a lot of the book lists from Beautiful Feet is another one that they have excellent book lists. Anything they recommend is a quality living book that most of the time it's learning through stories often that makes it come alive, and it makes the content come alive. I've always thought about that with living books. What book is going to truly bring this topic to life in my child's life? And it's so different than like a textbook or a 100%. Workbook. And I have even found there are some curriculum even that I've used with my older children. I know we're focusing on littles today, but where it is somewhat more of a workbook style, but still brings in that living book narrative alongside it to keep the learning alive, which is really the goal.
Yes.
Okay. So I know you did not come from a teaching background. So you talked about learning of how you wanted to educate your children. Did you always know you wanted to teach your children this way? Or was there like a catalyst that you thought, oh my, this is a different way, and I think I love it?
I think it just started like as I was in the process. We decided to homeschool, we decided my son needs more structure. When he was like 2.5, 3, was just struggling at home. And so that's kind of how I got into just looking into what homeschooling looks like. But the more I got into it, the more even just homeschooling in general, and this really specific time under the age of 6, I just thought this is their one precious childhood. It's so fleeting, and they have so many years after this, especially if they're going to be in academia and go on to university. They have so much more time to learn in like a rigorous way. This is their only time in their whole life to just play, to not have responsibilities, to not be forced and pressured into doing worksheets and learning their letters and colors and numbers, and to be graded and like inspected on, if they're like making the grade, but just to be able to have that just freedom, and especially the time to just play and be children.
Absolutely. And I would argue that the play is their most serious work. There's a quote by Mr. Rogers that says something along the lines of play is the most serious work of a child. And we talked a couple podcasts ago, we did one about learning through games, and it was for games of all ages, not just little ones, but hearing from the guests on that podcast about some statistics about how much quicker children learn and people learn through play and through games rather than through structured learning activities, and realizing that children are born innate learners, that they are born with a desire to learn, that I never said to my baby right now, like, hey, Graham, it's time for you to start pulling up on stuff now, bud. We're going to start learning this. Like, they just learn it. So I don't know what it is in our culture that makes us think that when it's time for other forms of learning, while of course he can pull up on things because we have couches and we have little gates that he can pull that are around. So he has those available to pull up from or pull up on. And I think similarly with our young children with learning, when we have the resources and we're reading good books and we're introducing letters in a fun way and we're spending time outside and introducing habits intentionally, we're doing all those things on purpose, but it's not in a way of us saying, you need me to instill this skill in you right now, but instead respecting their personhood and knowing you are born with an ability to learn and excitement to learn. And it is my job to not extinguish that, but to fan that flame and further that love for learning.
Especially in the little years, especially.
Yeah. So how would you say are ways that this looks different than maybe a traditional preschool idea?
I think it's interesting, the term traditional, because even if you look back at like the history of education, it really hasn't been that long that what we now in 2021 consider to be preschool has been a part of like, our educational history. Even like my dad, when he went to school in the 60s, he didn't go to kindergarten, didn't go to any preschool. And he actually went to like a one-room schoolhouse through like middle school ages with like his siblings and the neighbors. And that was like, only 50, 60 years ago. Really not that long. Even when I was growing up, like I didn't do any, what we consider to be traditional preschool. And I just think that there's somewhere along the lines, there's been all of a sudden this pressure to have our children be academically ready for kindergarten. And when kindergarten used to be the year of preparation to get them ready for, first grade. So there's just been such a shift. And I want to, for my children, push back and say, no, like it doesn't have to be this early, like this much pressure. It can be this just really light and free time of playing. I think too, like, it's just a very different style of learning. I remember when my son was maybe 2 or 3, we were a part of like a toy lending library at a local elementary school. And they had all these decorations up in the halls, little artwork and stuff the kids had worked on to get to the toy lending library. And there's a big poster where these preschool kids had done a lesson on flowers, parts of the flower. And so it's a worksheet and they cut out all these squares and posted them of like how a flower grows. And I just think if you're a non-reader, like all that activity is for you is just scissors and pasting. Like it's just cutting and pasting. You're like, as an adult, you're looking at the activity and you're like, oh, this is so cool. And look at all that they're learning. Look at all that they display that they're learning. But as a child, especially as a non-reader, like what really is there for you? I mean, so even that style of learning is so different than our style of learning, where my kids are learning about parts of a flower or how a flower grows because they're outside and they're seeing, oh, look at these sunflowers we planted with grandpa and look at them grow up into these beautiful flowers, and they are experiencing that hands-on, making those personal connections with the world around them, which is so different. I think if you look at even our traditional preschool settings, and I never want to like dog on like our school system, because those people were so hard for our children. And I know that there is just a part of homeschooling that there is like a privilege piece to it. But if you look at that, like when you have a classroom of 20 kids, you're just really limited, I think, in what you're able to do. And I think that's why they have a lot more of these activities that are crafts and like cutting and pasting. But especially, like I said, especially for non-readers, like it just is a very different experience, I think, of what they're actually learning.
Mhm.
So it does really differ from a traditional preschool setting.
I think also one of the big differences is when you have, I was a teacher for a
Mhm.
few years before I had my son. And one of the things that I saw, I did a long-term
Mhm.
sub in a kindergarten class and loved it. And I also got to
Yeah.
spend, when I was in high school, part of my homeschooling my senior year was
Mhm.
me doing observation hours and volunteering in a kindergarten classroom because I thought I wanted to
Mhm.
be a teacher. So my mom said, all right, let's get you in a classroom. And
Same.
it was wonderful. And one of the big kind of ahas for me that I took was realizing that if you're in a classroom setting, you have to show the learning somehow. There
Mhm.
has to be a tangible way to show that something's being learned or a skill has been um, mastered in some
Yeah.
way or another. You can't, it would be genuinely impossible for that teacher to watch every single child and make sure, okay, did all of you understand when you saw that sunflower, what was going on with it? Did all of
Yeah.
you, were each of you able to identify those parts verbally or through active
Mhm.
play? Whereas when you have your own child at home with you and you're doing something about animals, and let's say you're playing with a Noah's Ark and you have all of the animal pieces and you ask your child, let's line them up from the smallest animal to the biggest animal, and that would be so funny. They can wait in line to get in the ark, and you don't
Yeah.
have to have a sheet to show that you're learning small, medium, and large, or how to line
Names of
things
the
up by
animals
size,
and
names of
yes.
the animals, colors of animals,
Yes.
none of
Yeah.
that. But it doesn't, there's nothing to show for it. And that was a real, yeah, just kind of an aha moment for me when I had my first. So my oldest is almost 12, which is unbelievable to me. But when I think back to when I first started things with him and someone would ask, what are you learning? What is he doing right now? And realizing I had nothing to show except for what he had to show. And then
Yeah.
thinking about that truly what he has to show is much more valuable. And that's real world. When you learn a
Yeah.
skill in the real world, you don't actually often have anything tangible to show a paper that shows
Yeah.
this is what I learned. But when you have learned a new skill, you have that skill in you and part of you. And that was a really different thing. And it also caused me to have to trust myself differently and rest in that because I realized I wasn't proving myself. Thank goodness my husband wasn't asking me to like prove myself every day, but I couldn't. I could not have proven myself every day by showing. These are the things we did because much of what we did had no shown tangible project associated with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
And
sure. That's a really good point.
another thing with that I realized is a lot of things that I would ask or expect to be done to have a product was actually, like you said, looking for different skills. So I realized I'm actually wanting you to transcribe. I'm wanting you to or use a pencil and a pen or a crayon or whatever it is. Use that correctly to show that you understand how to write this thing,
Mm.
and which is really asking multiple skills. I want to make sure you can hold a crayon. I want to make sure you can move the crayon in the appropriate shape. I want to make sure you know the shape to put it in and know what that shape means.
Right.
Where if my goal is truly just understanding the ideas of these letters, it doesn't require any of those other steps.
Mm-hmm.
And so just realizing sometimes what we're asking of our preschoolers is truly more than we think at first glance we're asking them to produce.
Yes.
So okay, so that's what we're talking about. I think that's a good foundation. Let's talk about why we think this is important, because this is something I have been passionate about for years, and I have just loved seeing your passion for this. So what are some of the benefits that you have already seen in gently teaching your children as you do?
I mean, I think that even just having a lifestyle of learning in this way,
Mm.
I see one, so much less pressure on my children. They're not always expected to perform. They're not feeling that like academic pressure. Like my kids, they have zero concept of like whether they are ahead or behind. And I think far too often kids, even at young ages like 3 or 4 or 5, already know whether they are like in at the head of the class or like falling behind. And that's a hard burden to place on a child. So it's like not only less pressure and play, but I see so much benefit in just their imaginative play and their imaginations. They have much more room in their day to pursue hobbies and interests. And for them at their ages, that includes like imaginative play. And I think, there's been a lot of research that has been done about a child's imagination when they enter into kindergarten, and how there's a shift that can sometimes happen where all of a sudden their imaginative play goes down so much more because they are asked to do like so much more academic rigor. And for my children, like I really want to be protective of that and like let them like play dress up, let them build Legos, like let them have all this freedom. But I think also this style of learning at like a young preschool age helps them ease into the transition of like our school when we get to be that age. So for my son, who is, going to be 7 this year doing first grade, a lot of his curriculum is reading aloud. And we have had, here 5-6 years to build the habit of attention and reading aloud together, so that now at 7 years old, he can sit and I can read 25 pages of a chapter. And our lessons are usually much shorter, but like he will let me read to him as long as, he wants, as long as I will read. And I think he has a much deeper retention because we have stretched that skill of attention, so that he can sustain his attention much longer, because we've practiced it so much. So this style of learning, I think, isn't just protecting this childhood, but I think it really is laying some foundational building blocks for an academic year. So even with, our habit training and working on obedience, working on even just chores around the house, well, that makes our homeschool world go so much more smoothly when I'm not having to spend all this time saying, pick up your breakfast dishes, get dressed in the morning, where it just is laying these foundations that we can then build upon for the rest of our academic homeschool life together. And then I think just in general, one of the huge benefits to this is my kids getting to spend time together. So there is this relational benefit, where not only are they spending time with me and with each other that they would be missing out if they were in a traditional school setting, but like they also get to spend time with grandparents, with some of our elderly neighbors, with other friends that are also homeschooled, but are a mix of ages. It's not just, hey, we're going to go into this building, for 4 to 8 hours a day, and you're going to sit here with all these kids your own age, and you're all going to do the same lesson, and it's all going to be graded essentially, where there is this piece of togetherness that is really important. And it was really one of the things that attracted me most, is protecting the childhood, but then also this being together, and just having this, time really. But yeah, I see one of the main things that I think is a benefit that also has like this lasting result is, they are set up to be, I think, active and true learners. I think that we're not squelching that learning, that natural curiosity that you talked about out of them by saying you have to do it like this in this little box. But they have this whole world open to them where they can pursue their curiosity, for the first 6 years of their life. Oh, you're really interested in dinosaurs? Great. Let's learn all you want about dinosaurs. All you want about X, Y, and Z. You caught a cricket the other day. Great. We're going to learn all about crickets and the differences between crickets and grasshoppers. And you're going to have your curiosity is just ignited. And I think that is the lasting piece of what makes a true learner. And that hopefully, it's my hope that love of learning and that natural curiosity will carry them throughout all of their life, even past the traditional, 18 years or 25 years of schooling and higher education.
Yeah, I think that's huge what you talked about creating lifelong learners, because we're growing up in such a unique time, or our children are growing up in such a unique time, that they have every resource available to them to learn.
At their
And
fingertips.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The information is there. So anything they want to learn, they're able to. But if that will only happen well if they have a love for learning and the ability to know how to learn. And so I think by setting them up at this early age with the skills they need to be able to go through their days well, you talked about setting it up for their school days, but talk about preparing them for life. Goodness
Yes.
gracious. I think about even when I was in college and thinking about living with different people. And there were some people then who didn't have some of those skills who I watched and
Yeah.
thought, oh, dear me, how did you
Yes.
miss this? How over the last, 18 years of your life were those skills not
Hmm.
instilled?
Do you not know
And
how to do laundry? And yeah, it's like, and
yes.
that is more common than you would think. My husband works in the university setting, and there are tons of kids that enter into school, but it's because so much of their life prior to adulthood, launching into this collegiate adulthood season, has been school, where you're
Mhm.
not learning any of those skills. And then I think also a lot of families fill that extra time with sports and
Mhm.
extracurriculars and dance and all these other things that you kind of squeeze out that time where maybe you would be learning a lot of those
Mhm.
life skills: how to cook, how to do laundry, how to do your
Mhm.
dishes, things that are really setting them up for life. And so we always are hoping, like, starting with the end goal in mind. So even at preschool, thinking, what kind of adults am I trying to raise?
Mhm.
And how can I equip them even now at 3, 4, and 5, to become the people that we really hope that they will be?
Mhm.
So you're right. It's a lot
Yeah.
of skill building for now, but also for the future.
Yes. And one of the things with you mentioned like extracurriculars and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, I know, every family is going to decide differently what they want to do, but it's interesting coming off this last, forever of COVID. I don't even know how long we're calling it now. Whatever it was, coming off of this long time though, for us in Southern California, it was very different because
Hmm.
things were very closed down. And so we were at home a lot. And it was really wonderful that it caused me to go back and really reevaluate, where do I want our time spent? Because again, creative play takes space. It takes messes. It's not always
Hmm.
clean. My children all pretend together. And from the 12-year-old all the way down to the baby doesn't, but from the one who's almost 12 all the way one to the down to the one who's almost 3. I heard her go outside one day, the 3-year-old, and the big kids were already out there. And she yelled, "Wait for me. Are we playing Lost Kids?"
Cute.
And
That's
I
cute.
thought, this is it. This is important. And my oldest just finished building during some of his free time. He built this incredible structure. I'll share it on my Instagram this week. It's the coolest thing that he built. Like an A-frame thing with a climbing wall on one side and a steering wheel on the other side. And so the girls can go in it and it can be a hideout for them. But it took time and it took the willingness for it to be messy because it's taken a lot of time to give him those skills to even do that. And the fact that something could go wrong and, he could get hurt. There's always, risk involved.
Yep.
You do everything to the best you can. But just to say, we are getting ready to jump back in. So deciding intentionally, we had football practices this morning and that was exciting to get back into that space. And we will choose to do gymnastics with a couple of our girls for a time,
Mhm.
but choosing with great intentionality, how much
Yep.
time and money is worth putting into this space, because saying yes to those things does mean saying no to the different time we had at home over this last year. And
Yes.
I think that those places serve parts of who they are very well. So I think there's a healthy yes in the right yeses, but
Yeah.
it's also being intentional and willing to be different than the rest of the world by saying no to losing home and the benefits of that time and space.
Yeah. And we've kind of made a hard and fast rule in our home. As we're protecting this like growing time for our children
Mhm.
when they are under the ages of 6, like we also are protecting, like, where we just won't do individual extracurriculars.
Mhm.
So if all 3 of my kids can be in an activity, we'll do that together.
Mhm.
But I think too, like my husband and I, we love, like, he's like a sports guy. I was like a music person. Like we have seen a lot of value
Mhm.
in those things in our life, but at the young ages that my kids are, we're like, soccer when you're 3 or 4 is really just kids running out in the field. And
You're
we're like,
chasing a ball.
why would we, spend our precious family time in this, like they're only 3 for 1 year, and it just goes by so fast. Just sitting and watching our kids run around, like we just don't see the value at this age. When we see so much more value in them playing together. It's like, if you want to run around in the backyard, great. You guys can go and play like Robin Hood. To me, that is more valuable in this season. So we are, of course, like when 2020, everything is closed down. Now this school year, everything feels like, whoa, even 1 or 2 activities on the calendar feels full. And we are pursuing a lot of activities that we can do as a family. And as my kids grow, by the time my oldest is 12, I wouldn't be surprised if we had a really similar structure. But for this preschool age, I think we weigh the pros and cons, and we just, don't see the cost reaping a benefit for our kids being in a ton of extracurricular activities, especially ones that are just individual.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That makes complete sense. I agree 100%. And if that whole idea of jumping back into the world and thinking through that resonates with anyone, we did a podcast episode a long time ago about a beautiful new normal and how we get to choose a beautiful new normal intentionally for our family. So if that resonates,
I listened to that one. It was excellent. Yes.
I was actually just thinking, I need to go back and listen to what my other friends talked about on that episode to encourage me as I'm moving into this next season. Okay, let's talk about some specifics here. How can someone put this into practice? What are some actual steps that a mom can take to try to bring this different way of learning into her home?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, for me personally, I would start with just checking out worksheets. Like anything that is like requires more preparation for the mom than it does for the learner, like then it's actually on you as the teacher who's doing the work. And we want to always pursue activities that the work of the learning is on the learner and not on the teacher. And so like, I kind of have a hard and fast rule where we just don't do worksheets for my kids, under the ages of 5 and 6, because I don't see the benefit in a lot of those things. And we also, are intentional with our play. So for my girl who's going to be in preschool this year, she's 4.5. She'll be turning 5 in the school year. I have set out a couple of days a week where I'll do like a math-based activity with her and like a language arts-based activity. And I kind of write it out or schedule it out. Otherwise it doesn't happen as much, but that can look like, hey, today we're going to work on patterns. And so why don't we make like a beaded necklace together? We can talk about that. Why don't we play with these pattern blocks and we can talk about symmetry as we are, just making shapes and colors into pictures. Why don't we, like one of the things my kids love to do when we're walking back from the park in our neighborhood is to count together. And so we work on counting by memory, where I'll say 1 and then my other one will say 2 and we'll go back and forth. And then we work on skip counting and work on counting by 5s, just, they like to count how many steps it takes to get back to our house and stuff like that, and to see how high they can count. And so with my oldest, by the time he was about 5.5, or, he could count up to 1,000 just by his memory, because that's about how many steps it takes to get up to our house from the park. So it is a different style, but it's seeking opportunities to incorporate learning in what you're already doing. So even with letters, like each of my kids have their own like letter box, and I'll say, when my kids are in that preschool age, hey, can you find the letter that your name starts with? And so then they look, okay, well, what letter comes in your name next? Or, my middle one, she's very interested in like spelling her name, spelling names of our family members. And we've learned probably half the alphabet just by following her curiosity and equipping her with things that she already wants to do. I think I want to jump in
real quick. One thing you said that I want to jump in on there is you said following her curiosity. And I wanted to encourage moms in that one of the things that I think is different about our preschool system, just in general in America, is that it's based on preparing them for the starting kindergarten, or kindergarten is for preparing them for the next level in first grade. And if you are in a traditional school, you do need to have those skills to get to that next level, because that's where the class is picking up and moving forward from. So if a child is in a traditional classroom, they do need to be at that place. But if your child is at home with you, one of the things that is different is that you can follow their lead more and if you have a child who's passionate about letters, I have a cousin whose little one was just thrilled with letters and was able to understand more about letters and reading like years before where my children were, because he loved it. And so she followed his lead and she let him run with that. And it was beautiful to see, because if he was in a traditional setting, there would have had to be like, well, that's great. Glad you know this. We're still camping here because this is where everyone is.
And they spend so much time in a traditional school setting working on, do they know how to line up? Can they zip up their jacket themselves? Can they be quiet when the teacher raises their hand? And things that make their classroom function more efficiently. And so
they're necessary.
Things, yes, it's so necessary for the classroom. And those things we don't have to work on. So we spend that time, how can our home run more smoothly? And so that's, putting your dishes away, throwing your clothes down the hatch, wiping off the counter if you spill a mess, and all those kinds of things that are, it's just a different type of lifestyle, really.
Yeah. So what resources would you recommend? I think my first thought would be is they need to follow you on Instagram, because you have so many resources available there. And if you missed it at the beginning, her Instagram is at littlehouse_Northwoods. And I will link that in the show notes too, but you need to follow her because she has excellent resources on her Instagram of exactly some of the things she does and how you can implement them. But if you were to recommend a few resources here, I know you already mentioned Ambleside Online is an excellent resource.
Yeah, great. Especially for those younger years for the book list.
What other resources would you recommend?
The Simply Charlotte Mason has a book called The Early Years, and that was really foundational to my understanding and learning. I would highly, highly recommend that book. I think you can buy like just a digital copy that's pretty inexpensive. As far as like, even one thing that I think is core to our preschool time is having good outdoor gear. That's something I never thought about when I was going into motherhood, but if we're spending time outside, I feel like my kids really need to have warm, especially Minnesota, gear that's going to allow for us to have that time outside. You're right. Ambleside Online's book list. There are tons and tons of book lists out there. And you're right too. On my Instagram, I do have a bunch of highlights about preschool and kind of more like links and fleshing out just kind of these ideas of what does it mean to have a training? What does it mean to have a living book, that sort of thing. But I also have one, and we'll be sharing more this year as we do preschool again, about seeing preschool in action. So seeing some of these play by the way, where we're playing tic-tac-toe with letters, and where we're just doing like one of my kids' favorite activities is writing letters with sidewalk chalk and then pouring a watering can on it, things like that, where you can see it in action. Cause I do feel like conceptually, it's sometimes hard to get your brain around what does this actually look like. But yeah, there's so many good like resources out there. I feel really lucky to be homeschooling in this day and age, to be doing preschool in this day and age, because I don't think I would know half these things if there wasn't people, like you, who are putting out great resources and podcasts and things.
Yeah, I think about the early years when my mom was homeschooling us and what a different world it was, that she didn't have the same resources we do. And in some ways, maybe it was nicer because she didn't have Pinterest and she didn't have the Instagram moms who showed all the perfect things they were doing. And she was able to just be at rest in her home with the way she did it. I was just looking back in my Audible real quick to remind myself of a couple of books that I read that I think helped form this in me. And one I was thinking about is the book For the Children's Sake by Susan Schaefer, Macaulay. Yes. And I will link that also. And then another one, and that one's excellent. The audio is good too. If you want to listen to it, I have a hard time.
It's easier to listen to, I feel like.
Yeah. I have a hard time finding time to read all the books I want to read, but I can listen. So,
yes.
I just saw your reel about like finding time to read as a mom the other day, and I get it. I'm there. Another one talking about steering away from that rigorous mindset of thinking you have to do everything deeply and intensely at an early age. That's so good is Teaching from Rest by Sarah Mackenzie.
Yes.
And
I read that every year.
It's so good to give you a fresh start and a fresh mindset. And I'm also reading right now Awaking Wonder by Sally Clarkson.
That's a good one too.
Highly recommend. Oh, so many good books. Highly recommend that one. And these are all good as Audible books if you're thinking I have time for that, but not time to read. And I think that those things will surprisingly shape you because it's really shaping your mindset more than it is giving you tangible tools or
Yes.
product in your hand. It's not so much about what you buy to use. It's the way that you choose to go about the learning that's going to be very different.
Yes.
Katie, this was so much fun. Thank you so much. And I look forward to following along with your next year of preschool this year.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Excellent. Well, we'll keep in touch. It was good having you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, bye.
What an encouragement Katie was. That was so much fun to talk with her about something that is so important, those beautiful early formative years of our children's lives, and what a privilege we have to be their moms and walk through those years with them. If you could use a little bit more encouragement, feeling like maybe you're not capable of homeschooling, maybe you don't have it in you, I want to point you back to an episode that we did a while ago. Episode 31 was called Yes, You Can Homeschool. And I would encourage you to listen to that. It's with one very seasoned homeschool mom who would have said no, she could never homeschool, and then did. And with another mom who's actually the mom of an only child. And so she has a different take on it than the mom of all of the children does. And she works for CHIA, which is the Christian Home Educators Association of California. So she has some different interesting perspectives to bring to the conversation as well. We also talk more about homeschooling. Back on episode 3, we revisited that conversation on January 4th. So if you're scrolling through podcasts, you'll find it on January 4th. It was episode 3 about homeschooling, and that one could encourage you. And if you're really wondering about reading aloud specifically, we talked quite a bit about read alouds today. We did a whole conversation on that back on episode 12 about reading aloud. And I know that you would enjoy that one too. So I want to encourage you that God is so faithful. And I think about that word, that scripture that says, God is able to make all grace abound in you, so that in all things, in all times, in all that you do, you will abound in every good work. You got this, Mama. Keep leaning into him. He will equip you and guide you how you are going to be leading your children during this beautiful season of early learning. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss any of our weekly conversations. And check out our show notes below, where I have links to the resources mentioned on the podcast. I release a new podcast every Monday and additional content at seekholyliving.com, including a video of this conversation and a deeper dive into all things mom. Also, be sure to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Seek Holy Living for more fun and conversation. If this was an encouragement to you, please share it with your friends. And join us next week as we talk about living debt-free.